Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Student Affairs Live. I'm your host, Eric Stoller, and today we're talking with Tom Jackson. It's going to be a great show and I'm really excited. A couple things here I just wanted to say. Student Affairs Live is your weekly web show. It's all about student affairs professionals coming on the show, talking about student conduct, leadership, social media, association news, kind of the latest, greatest things that are happening. So it's going to be an awesome show we've got today, and I'm really excited. So let me show you a couple things here. HigherEdLive.com is the website, and if you go there, you can follow everything that we're doing. Looks like we're getting a little bit of audio feedback here, so I'm gonna tone down Tom's microphone. You never know what you're going to get with that behind-the-scenes sort of live action that we're getting here on the web. Also, if you're following us on Twitter, the hashtag for today's show, as always, is SAlive. And if you follow at HigherEdLive, Ardith, our super awesome intern, will be sharing information, news, tips, and all sorts of things about the show. Want to give a shout out to the folks at Integral. Without Integral, we would not have a show. Student Affairs Live is sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Please make sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. The webinar happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, and Ardith will be sending out a tweet with that link in a moment. So again, everybody, this is going to be an awesome show. I'll be checking Twitter. Ardith will be checking Twitter. Tom's going to be checking Twitter. We'll all be looking at what you have to say. Lots of questions about consolidation. It's a big topic. So I want to welcome our guest today, Tom Jackson. Tom is former president of ACPA and is currently VP of Student Affairs at Louisville. Tom, welcome to Student Affairs Live.
Hey, Eric. Thank you very much for being here. It's really nice to be here.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on the show, Tom. I think folks are going to have a lot of questions for us. I think we're going to have a really good conversation today. I'm noticing a little bit of feedback on your microphone, so don't worry about it. We'll just get through it. We'll power through, and it's more about the content, and we'll have a little bit of audio issues. It's no big deal. It's what you get with this sort of, internet stuff that we're doing.
It must be the sunshine in Louisville.
Yeah, because we're not having any sunshine in Oregon right now. We've gone from sunshine to Oregon sunshine, which means it's raining. So now I'm going to keep you on the line, Tom, if you don't mind, just in case you have a few comments about this week's Challenge and Support. As many of you know, Challenge and Support is sort of my feature each week where I talk about just topics that are relevant to student affairs professionals. It could be a couple things, many things, whatever. This week I've decided to lead story is going to be Snooki. If you went to the Student Affairs Collaborative blog today, you could read a post from Cindy Kane, who's at Bridgewater State University. And her post is entitled Lessons from Snooki. And many of you have been following this issue. What happened in Rutgers is they were going to bring in Toni Morrison in May to talk about commencement. She's getting paid X amount of dollars to be the commencement speaker for Rutgers. And earlier in the month, Rutgers brought in Snooki, who's a star of Jersey Shore, through their Student Activities Fund. And different funding streams, Rutgers was taking a lot of heat for it. On one hand, you've got Toni Morrison, obviously a highly respected author, activist, done a lot of things for a lot of people. And Snooki, in her own way, probably has done a lot of things for a lot of people. And so read that article. It's a great discussion. And I think Cindy really framed it well in saying, how do we work with our students when they want to bring on someone who's going to be controversial, and yet at the same time, it's their choice, it's their funding line. So really good article over there at the Student Affairs Collaborative. Another thing that came up this week was on Inside Higher Ed. I read an article about a professor who had gone into class and shut a student's laptop. And the title of the article was Laptop and Battery Arrest. What happened essentially was there was a student who was, I think, updating their Facebook or something along those lines in class. Professor went up, closed the laptop lid, student filed charges, and the professor was arrested on battery charges. And it's a really interesting dynamic that's happening with sort of social media and the web and students using smartphones or laptops during class. And there's this interesting sort of power play that's happening with professors saying, on one hand, we have the right to sort of get in the space of a student, touch their property, touch their phone, their laptop, and the student affairs person in me says, wait a minute, we have a process. There's academic disorder, policies on the books. If you're in a classroom and you disrupt the classroom, that professor can take you through the conduct process. And I think that as leaders, we really have to model that with our students, that it's not about using our power and authority to sort of bully our students into submission. It's about how we as leaders show our students that this is how you deal with issues in a world that is framed around education. So take a look at that article on Inside Higher Ed. I think Jeff Lale had a really good comment, and I think it was over 40 comments or so in the article right now. And honestly, it's really appalling to read some of the comments of people who say that it's okay to sort of touch students' property. I mean, it's their stuff. We have processes and laws for a reason, so follow them.
Hey, Eric, can I comment on that?
Absolutely.
Real quickly.
Yeah.
I think for some of our faculty inside the classroom as well, they're also seeing a change in the decorum and the protocols that actually happen inside of a classroom. And over the years, they've noticed arguably less respect and civility between students and faculty. And so I also believe there's a misunderstanding and just an uncomfortableness with the use of technology sometimes inside a classroom. And all of those things are coming together, and it's difficult for some of our faculty to grapple with the changing student culture and the technology and the decorum and the respect and all of those things. And so I think on one hand, it's kind of easy to say that it's solely a student issue, but I also think there's a faculty issue in there on how to address students inside the classroom and deal with the changing culture, generation, and all those other things. So I don't want to hang the faculty out to dry on this one either.
Yeah, no, it's definitely there's sort of the expectation from students or of our students to make sure that they're engaged in their learning. It's a conversation. It's not a us versus them kind of thing. And I think that it's really easy to start pointing fingers. And in this case, I'm on the side of the student. In terms of if I was the student in that class and you shut my laptop, that's my stuff. And you know what? If you're not teaching me in a way that's keeping me on the edge of my seat and engaged, and I'm on Facebook or I'm tweeting or whatever, and I'm not doing it in a way that's educationally relevant, you better buck up and bring some more value to the class, because why am I distracted enough that I'm doing this? That's always been my point. So that's a great comment though, Tom. So on to the next one here. On to the next point. I wanted to give a shout out real quick to the folks at NC State University. On their website, they've got this feature, Hope Unscripted, and it's part of the It Gets Better campaign. They have a video on there. They call it kind of a mini documentary. It's about 14 minutes long, and if you watch it, it's really, the first couple of minutes, first 4 minutes or so, are really hard to watch, because it sort of outlines the experiences of some LGBT students at NC State. And I mean, this is the kind of experience that could be echoed all around the country, and it's heartbreaking, and it's the kind of thing that needs to be heard and seen by a lot of folks, because it's really hard for folks who are in areas where they're being oppressed simply because of their identity. And I really love the video that NC State did, because the last 10 minutes are inspirational, and it's all about hope, and it's all about what we can do to make things better. And literally, the video shows how it does get better. And so I wanted to give a shout out to the folks at NC State for putting that video together. I thought it was really well done and very inspiring, and honestly needs to be seen by a lot of folks. So as everyone knows, I do a weekly shout out, if you will, kind of a shout out of the week. And I want to give this week's shout out to someone who I'm a huge fan of, Brene Brown. She's a, quote, vulnerability researcher, end quote, at the University of Houston. And she gave a TED Talk a while ago on the sort of merits of vulnerability and how her personal journey into researching vulnerability as well as sort of adopting it in her own life. And it's the kind of talk that I think resonated with a lot of folks. It was just extremely powerful, extremely relevant, and I believe Ardith will be tweeting that out at Higher Ed Live here in a second. But again, Brene Brown doing some really cool stuff, really encouraging people to be vulnerable and to put themselves out there. So that is my shout out of the week. Again, Brene Brown, check her out, follow her on Twitter. She's doing some really cool stuff. All right, folks, it is time. We are going to bring in Tom for a discussion, a conversation about consolidation, or as I like to say, the hashtag. It's almost unpronounceable, but I think it's what, NASPA, if you really wanted to say it out loud. I'm not going to make you say it out loud, Tom, because I think that would be rather mean of me to do. But I want to start off with sort of an intro into this whole consolidation thing, because it's been going on for a while. The conversation that you sort of spearheaded in a way with Mike Sagawa at NASPA. You guys were at least the sort of the physical, not the physical, the public presence, if you will. Everyone was talking about you guys a couple years ago, and I know you were sort of shepherding the process. And so if you could talk about that initial process of the conversation leading up to consolidation, kind of a summary of where we're at today.
I'd like to start off really with somewhat of a funny, and it really goes back almost 25 years. Maybe it's not a total joke, but this whole process probably started for myself as well as for Mike, who was my counterpart, Mike Sagawa with NASPA, and me with ACPA 25, 30 years ago. And it was really coming out of Shippensburg University, where I was a master's student. One of the first questions asked of me at one of the assistant deans was, which organization are you going to join, Tom? And that essentially has defined most of my career. Which organization am I going to join? And at that particular time, I had a number of colleagues in graduate school who said they were going to join ACPA. And I actually joined NASPA for a number of different reasons at that particular time, and stuck with it over the last 25 years. And the surprising thing is, along the way, Mike and I had parallel careers in many respects, even serving on a panel discussion at one time about dual career couples. Nowhere in any of that career track did we ever think we both serve as presidents of our two respective organizations. And so I think this conversation started roughly 30 years ago, well before he and I came into a position to shepherd it. And when I was president, I saw a number of emails from past presidents who talked about some of the conversations they had had earlier on with members of NASPA or other places like that on why there were two organizations. Now, flash forward ahead very quickly, we realized that one of the conversations that needed to occur, and this really occurred with Vasi Torres and Jan Walburn from NASPA, about the future of the profession. And we brought together groups, individuals from throughout the profession, not just ACPA or NASPA. And that conversation was had, and one of the elephants in the room was really simple. We need to have this conversation about what we're going to do with ACPA and NASPA. Let's figure this thing out once and for all, because our future, and given the economy, is really dependent upon all of that. That led to a number of other discussions that Mike and I actually happened to inherit. And we took that very seriously because both he and I were members of both organizations, and we clearly could see the unique parts about both organizations. So the long and short of all of this is, 2 years ago, we shepherded that conversation, pushed this agenda through both of our organizations with an enormous amount of help from both boards and members of both associations. Had historic dialogue between the officers of both organizations and the boards of both organizations, which has continued really with 5 different administrations now within ACPA and NASPA. And so he and I may have been one of those who at least planted that seed 2 years ago, but we've really been talking about this in great detail for 2 years now. And as some have said, it's time to vote. It really is just time to vote and decide once and for all, what do we want to have done with ACPA and NASPA. So that's sort of a quick and short history lesson on some of it. And I'm sure there's a lot of other questions you have that are more specific.
No, I think that folks need to know. I mean, I think for a lot of people, especially new professionals just joining the conversation, it's something that feels relatively new, and it's been going on a long time. But correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first time we've actually had a vote, right, where we've actually gotten this far?
Correct. Roughly about 10 years ago, the conversation came up again, and there happened to be a couple of conversations, serious conversations, and they died well before they made it out of committee and into the board of directors or the governing board of ACPA. Now I'll speak for myself on this one, not as a representative of either ACPA or NASPA, but I was a member of both organizations at that time, and I was a new vice president. And I really looked forward to having that conversation and actually voting on that almost a decade ago. Now, at that time, I had no aspiration to be an ACPA president or a NASPA officer for that matter either. And so it was disappointing as a vice president and a voting delegate to never really have a say in that conversation. It was kind of killed before it made it to some of us out in the ranks. And I thought to myself, like some of you might be thinking, I'm going to have to work in this field for a lot longer. I still had 20, 25 years to go. And I said to myself, I'm going to have to live with this decision at least for that long, 10 years, maybe 15. And I wish someone would have asked me, the person coming into the ranks who has to live with this decision, rather than maybe some of those who are leaving the profession a little bit later on. And I've heard that same thing from some of our newer and mid-level managers, as well as some of the newer SSAOs out there. And so this is absolutely the first time we've got it to a vote, and that really was the goal. We wanted to decide this once and for all, because as we said, if the members say we don't want to have this, that's democracy in action. We've done the process, we've laid it out there, people have made their decision, and that's kind of what we wanted. So we're really happy that we finally got to this point, and people get to weigh in once and for all.
Yeah, no, I think it's showcasing, hopefully, the values that we have as a profession. You know, we're all about equity and listening and empathy and critical thinking, and if you know, it's showcasing sort of the best and worst of everything that we've got, and I think that it'll be really interesting to see. I know one thing too, I think a lot of folks have wondered is, you know, voting stops electronically on April 15th, but we're not going to know about whether or not the vote's actually been yes or no for a while, right?
No, as I sometimes say, we're in that commit stage right now, and I mentioned voting just a second ago, but we really are at that point where if you have not voted, people need to vote. And you're right, the election is done April 15th, but we have to accommodate for some individuals who did not receive ballots electronically. And for probably most of your viewers and listeners, they're probably saying, what in the heck are you talking about? But the truth is, we still have individuals that are members that receive their communication by mail, and we have to allow for that. And so with the April 15th stop date, we are essentially saying that we need to accommodate a little bit of time for the mail to get back to the companies that are doing the balloting, and then count it all up. And so we're not expecting to hear until the end of the month of April.
Okay.
And we'll go through the presidents, through the boards, then to everyone else.
Yeah, because I would expect that it's going to ripple through the profession once the word is out. People will definitely be interested. One of the questions, I want to just go through some of the questions that I've been tracking. People have been talking to me quite a bit about it. I've written a lot about consolidation. Everybody knows where I'm at, obviously, so I'm not going to talk about that. But one of the things that it just keeps coming up over and over again is this idea of the giant mega conference. I was at NASPA in Philadelphia, and I was at ACPA in Baltimore. And, you know, I think NASPA had around 5,000 people, maybe ACPA had 3,000 or so. And folks kept saying, you know, if you have a joint conference, well then, obviously I won't be able to network as often. Because clearly, I don't know about you, but I was able to meet with everybody that was in Baltimore. 3,000 people, I can meet with 3,000 people in like a couple days. 5,000 was a bit of a stretch. I had to have a lot of coffee. But I mean, in all seriousness, we can only network with about 100 people or so anyway. And so, you know, we talked about the joint conferences. We talked about Orlando. And I noticed you tweeted earlier today was, ask me about why I liked Orlando. And I think that is an interesting question, because people want to know, you know, what's going to happen when we have a large conference, if consolidation does take place. Let's say we have 10,000 people. What's that going to look like? How would you respond to the people who ask the question or pose the question of, you know, what's going to happen to my networking opportunities? And also, what about just the logistics? Because, you know, are the cities limited? I've seen that question brought up a lot. Is it going to be a bus disaster like Chicago? You know, different things that people bring up over and over again. So if you could talk about, you know, what would that joint conference bring that we haven't seen before? What are some of the benefits? And honestly, tell us why you liked Orlando, because I'm really curious.
Well, let me go back 1 second on some of that. There's a fundamental belief in both ACPA and NASPA that one of the things that we like to have done, and that's something we believe in, like I just said, is that people should come together and learn from one another. That's a fundamental belief in both ACPA and NASPA, which is why we believe so strongly in not only the state associations, but the regionals, and why we established districts and states in this new association. And then all the smaller networks and things of sort that come with both organizations. So having said that, when the subcommittees got together and they began discussing this, one of which was on conventions and professional development and things of that sort. There was a strong understanding and belief that we should and could have stronger districts. And because not everyone can come to a national or international conference or convention, it was important that we provided outlets for all of our members at the local level, which is where we're dealing with the most pressing issues that affect us on our respective campuses. And so that was extremely, extremely important. It also de-emphasizes, in some way, the importance of the national convention. Now, for those of us who are national or international minded, that's really important. That's really who we're talking about here, too. Now, the unique part about Orlando was Mike Sagawa and Jill Carnegie were the chairs of that conference. And so Mike especially knows that event extremely, extremely well. And listening to him talk about it firsthand as the chair was very enlightening, not only for me as a Consolidation steering team member, but a colleague working on this with him. What was unusual about Orlando, was it came together fairly late in the game. Usually we're planning out 5 years, even longer if we can, for convention sites, and this came together fairly rapidly. That team had to work with what Orlando could provide for us in a very short period of time, and the properties just weren't very close. And so that complicated things. But the big difference between Orlando and what a new association convention could look like is the simple fact that we wouldn't have to do two of everything. NASPA and ACPA, when we do joint conferences, we are essentially doing one thing for ACPA, one thing for NASPA. In other words, all the commissions have to meet, all the knowledge committees have to meet, all the networks have to meet, all the SSALs of one organization and the other have to meet. And so we're essentially doing two different things for a joint conference. But with one new association, where some of these things have now combined, there's only one. Now, naturally, the legacy and historical things remain, and some of the institutes remain, because those are very important, not only the NASPA, but also the ACPA. Now, I'll tell you, Eric, the thing I liked most about Orlando was the bus ride. And I know we gripe about that a little bit.
Wait a minute, the bus ride? Really?
The bus ride.
I thought you were going to say Al Gore for sure.
Oh, that's right. He was there. It's the bus ride because you talked about networking and meeting people. And we're running from thing to thing in a convention if you involve yourself and are very serious about going to different workshops and programs. But that bus ride was like a oasis of time. You walked onto the bus, you sat beside someone, and you had this really wonderful conversation with them for about 10 or 15 minutes. We don't do that now in a conference. We're running and we're going from place to place. And if you stop for coffee, you might talk to that person in line in front of you or behind you. But how many of us listening to this really, really did that at ACPA or NASPA? But in Orlando, we did that. And so I thought that was just fantastic. I met some fantastic people on that bus, and I liked that. I really did. And so,
no, I think it's, it's glass is half full, glass is half empty. And guess what? Our glasses are somewhere in the middle, right? It's the gray that we all live in. And yeah, I was on some of those buses, and I can relate. I met a couple of folks, so that's a good point.
Eric, let me add something on that one, because you also mentioned cities. Mm-hmm. And the truth is right now, NASPA, let's say they have 10,000 members, and they average about 4,500 to 5,000 people at their conferences. There's nothing preventing NASPA from having a conference of 10,000 people right now. I mean, their members can go, plus non-members. But about 50% of both ACPA and 50% of NASPA attend their conferences, give or take. Don't hold me exactly to that number. So we might project that we would have a conference somewhere in that 6,000 to 7,000 range, maybe more, maybe less. And we think that is big. But the truth is, to the trade show planners out there in all of our cities across the United States, that's not even average, just barely an average conference. For example, here in Louisville, home of ACPA 2012 next year.
Good plug.
It's a couple years ago, Louisville held the NRA conference, which had 50,000 participants come through Louisville. And that same year, they held the 4-H conference, which had another 50,000 members come through there. And so to Louisville, which is a some would call a second-tier city with an enormous amount of swagger, and one who couldn't hold something like that because we only think of Baltimore, D.C., Atlanta, L.A., Phoenix, etc. The truth is, we handled that extremely easily, and cities like ours can easily handle that. 7,000, yet alone 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, is very, very simple for a city of our size, and a 7,000 one in Louisville would be as intimate as it was in Baltimore, for example. So it's not an issue per se of cities. It's an issue of reframing how we view, how we want to engage the other persons around us.
Nice. I mean, good plug, by the way, for Louisville. One of the things that I saw on Twitter, Deb Schmidt-Rogers asked the question when I think I was at the airport coming back home from Baltimore, and she asked the question of there's definite cultural differences between the organizations if you generalize sort of in a broad sense. Anybody who was at the opening for NASPA versus the opening for ACPA, clearly these are different openings, right? Different organizations in terms of the way they put themselves out there. And Deb asked the question is, are the differences between the organizations insurmountable? And I think, that's a question that a lot of people need to talk about, and I think if you could provide some perspective on that, because at NASPA it felt like the sort of the folks who were against consolidation, let's just say that, they were wearing more suits, right? They were a little older than me. They're a little more gray than I have right now. And the folks at ACPA, I didn't really know what to call them, but let's just say a younger crowd, right? Newer professionals, maybe less suit-wearing folks. And they were against consolidation seemingly in larger numbers. And so, what are your thoughts about that? Sort of from one, the sort of organizational cultural differences, and two, your thoughts on the different sort of groups that are against consolidation at this point, and their differences, because it seems like they have larger similarities in terms of why they want it not to happen than the reasons they have for it to happen.
I sometimes think it's easier for us to wonder what the other organization is like if we've never. Let me go back 1 second. I think it's easier if you're a member to really appreciate both organizations for what they stand for and represent. If you're only a member of one, I can say with confidence you're really missing half of what this profession has to offer, because combined they are very rich, and they are whole when they're very rich. And I mean they are. I think I said that right. They are rich.
They're rich when they're whole. Yeah.
Right. And if you're only a member of one and you haven't taken the time to really understand the other, then the argument goes just a little bit hollow. But I don't want to marginalize or discount those who have taken a position on this in either way, on either front. I think NASPA and ACPA are both fantastic organizations. And they have existed for a very long time. And I believe in NASPA. There's a lot of things I like about NASPA that I think are stronger than ACPA, and vice versa. And that's why something like this is important. When I think of NASPA and I think about the individuals who feel strongly about their association, I'm one of them. I think that NASPA does some things extremely well, and they serve their members extremely well, and they have a core, an administrative core, which is how they were founded as deans, and it's stayed there through 90 plus years. That's really good. And the fact that organization and their emphasis on public policy and administration and serving students and propelling a higher ed agenda is just fantastic. And it's second to none, I think, in the world. And so it's easy for me to say, why would we want to lessen that by potentially affiliating with another organization that might have a slightly different emphasis. And so I don't fault anyone for saying I believe in NASPA, because there's a lot of things I think NASPA is extremely strong on, and their history and legacy stand for that. Now, on the other side, ACPA has their own strong credibility. I mean, social justice and sustainability and inclusivity are values that ACPA believes in, practices every day of the week, and propels within their professional programs and conferences every chance that they have. That's one of the driving elements of that organization, and the emphasis on process and including people and hearing all voices Little voices, big voices, voices that are often not heard, voices that are always heard, is what makes ACPA very, very special. And that's something that NASPA would benefit from having more of, and ACPA would benefit a little bit more from having some of the structure and elements of NASPA. And so I believe that both have elements that belong together. As far as who's saying what, I wouldn't generalize per se with suits, because that would be me.
Hey man, I wore this today just for you.
I know, I saw that. I wouldn't necessarily say it's suits per se in either organization or the youthful newer crowd in one or the other. NASPA has an enormously large graduate and newer professional membership, and we sometimes forget that. They may have as much, if not a larger membership than ACPA, just because they're a larger organization. That's not to say that all the newer members in NASPA are for and just the older ones are against. I think it's a combination of individuals who are simply saying, this is why I believe in NASPA, and I want NASPA to stay whole and to continue to serve the members as we know it. The same is true for ACPA. There are newer members who may be for, and some others who like ACPA as they happen to be. The dialogue has just occurred very differently in both organizations.
Absolutely.
And that's the subtle difference. One, after 2 years of dialogue, I just simply believe ACPA is ready to put to rest this question, as is NASPA now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as a young professional in Chicago, I kind of grew up with NASPA. It wasn't until last year when I met you, actually, for the first time at Boston, that I attended my first ACPA event, and I met all these awesome professionals, and I kept thinking to myself, where have these folks been? Where have I been in this conversation? Because here's a bunch of people that I didn't know before who are doing amazing things, and now I couldn't imagine a world where I wasn't affiliated and working with both groups. It just seems to me that there's a ton of people who are either joint members or members of either group, and there's just so much richness from both organizations. I wanted to ask a question. It was more of a point that was raised on Twitter earlier this morning. And it comes from Kayla, no last name given on Twitter. The consolidation proposal has brought up questions in ACPA about values. For example, the proposal does not mention social justice. And you and I were talking about this earlier, sort of our pre-show conversation. And I think it was, one of the things I wanted to share is social justice may not be mentioned in the proposal for consolidation. Technology isn't necessarily mentioned in the proposal for consolidation. One of the things I think people are getting stuck on a little bit is that we're going to have a fully formed group or association that's going to be everything for everybody the second the voting is announced, if consolidation takes place. And we're voting to join up. We're not voting for a fully formed organization. We're voting to say we're going to come together, and then the real work begins after that, because people have been holding off on doing a lot of different things. Right? I mean, what do you say to folks who ask the question about, well, I don't feel I'm included. There's a comment from someone who's affiliated with career services folks, and saying, ACPA is really friendly to career services. Will that happen once there's this new association?
See, you've heard me say this before. The person down the hall in my office is a officer in NASPA. But when we walk across this campus, no one asks us who's ACPA and who's NASPA. I mean, our students only know us as two of the administrators for the university. Now, I know I switched on you just a little, but to that point, this is student affairs. ACPA and NASPA are representative of student affairs or student development as the profession. And so I think it's more than just saying one organization does a little more than one on career services and one does a little less or something else like that. It's deeper than that. And when we talk about social justice, it's deeper than that as well. As to your point, we don't say a lot of things in that proposal that happens to be out there at this particular point in time. It's a framework that was provided for the members so that they can have an idea on what could happen should they choose to affiliate ACPA and NASPA. And to your point, an enormous amount of work will occur in the coming year should that vote be affirmative, including an enormous amount of members from both ACPA and NASPA, because that process is very important to both organizations. And so you can look forward to calls for members and individuals and other people to really take part in what this is going to look like. Now, the other element to this is we're not starting from scratch. We're talking about ACPA and all that it stands for, and NASPA and all that it stands for isn't just going to cease to exist at the end of the vote or in a year. I mean, there's so many things that we stand for in student affairs. And as I said at ACPA, when I talked about this, we're not the English department. We're not affiliating with the English department. We are affiliating with NASPA. And I would say this as a NASPA member, we're not affiliating with ACPA. I mean, we're affiliating with ACPA. We're not affiliating with the English department on some particular campus.
Right. It's not a completely discongruent group that we're coming to join up with. It's, you know,
our brother and sister.
Exactly. I mean, it's basically our family's been sitting at two different tables, and it's time for us to join up and get to the one with many leaves in it, so we all fit around the same place.
The two closest similar organizations in the world are talking about affiliating. That's really it. There's nobody closer together than each other. And so social justice is a part of both of us. We just talk about it a lot in ACPA, but it gets talked a lot about in NASPA as well. You really have to go to both to hear it. It's not absent from NASPA, and it's not absent from any one of our fabrics. It's integrated into all of the things that we happen to do, which is probably why it's easy to not always articulate or talk about, because it's right there. It's a part of already who we are.
It's at the core. You don't have to shout about it all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the things that keeps coming up that I want you to address is people email me and they ask about the question of involvement. Sort of when you merge two groups together, the opportunity that folks keep telling me or asking me, will the opportunity for involvement decrease? And I have thoughts about it, obviously, but I want to hear your thoughts about what will happen when if consolidation takes place with regards to involvement opportunities.
Okay, I'm gonna be just a little bit cynical. Okay, Eric, allow me just a little bit of cynicism.
Okay. I'll cut you off if you take too much.
I've heard that a few times, and I have to ask myself. We are talking about student affairs practitioners saying that we're going to be less engaged and less involved by doing this. That would be almost anti-student affairs in a way. I mean, I can't think of anything in the academy that we do less of when given the opportunity to potentially do more of it. And so what I mean by that is by bringing these two organizations together, we've built in, at least in the proposed framework, opportunities for many, many people to get involved. For example, if you're a NASPA member right now, by definition, NASPA does not have states. Now, NASPA affiliates with states and they have state organizations. We all know that. But the opportunity for NASPA members to become more involved at the local level increases in enormity because of the role that states play in ACPA. Those in states in ACPA have an opportunity now to become more involved at the district level. That really isn't an option unless you're a member of both. Let's talk about journals and authorship or volunteering on journals. Enormous amount of opportunity to write or publish for more publications, or to volunteer in editor roles or things for both organizations. That's significant. We have more institutes, the named institutes of NASPA and the named institutes of ACPA. That now comes into the whole mix. Essentially, everything of ACPA and everything of NASPA can easily get put together, and for the same price, you get the benefit of both. As far as involvement, let me continue on that same theme. Right now, we have roughly 28 communities of practice listed on the proposal for the new association. Give or take, we have about 20 commissions and 6 standing committees within ACPA and about 25 or so knowledge communities within NASPA. Already, you can see that we've increased the number of possible opportunities for members. Just doing the math right there, 28 communities of practice plus social identity groups, which are yet to, we've tried hard not to define them because they're so organic, but there are an enormous number of opportunities that will be contained as those get defined throughout this next process. And then the board of directors and the leadership council, which in the new governance structure is fairly unique. We are essentially following a model where we have individuals at the macro level dealing with financial, strategic, and policy level issues, and then those at the programmatic level, the Leadership Council and the new governance structure dealing with the micro issues of the organization. That's more opportunities for individuals to get involved in the organization as well. So I will say that I believe that there will be more opportunity for individuals to get involved. It still requires people to go someplace, go to a state conference, go to a district meeting, go to an annual meeting of some sort and raise their hand and do things. For those who are not doing that, looking for ways to get involved, this isn't going to be the excuse. They're still going to show up and raise their hand. And so I actually believe there will be more opportunities.
One of the things that I want to make sure that I address, because we're getting a lot of comments. Twitter, folks who are tweeting at SAlive have been doing an amazing job of tweeting the hashtag, as well as the consolidation hashtag. So thanks for everyone for putting out your concerns, your comments, your thoughts. I wanted to address a couple, because I've been getting some behind the scenes question here. Is just sort of there's actually it's a perfect sort of pro-con sort of argument. One was from Jacelyn Keys. Jacelyn was saying, and Tom, I'm going to cut to myself for a second here. It looks like you're getting a little lost on the stream. One of the things that Jacelyn said was, I understand there are complications, but for a young professional, belonging to only one major organization is much easier financially. And I think that, having been a member of both at the same time in graduate school as well as now professionally, it's a lot of dough to put out there to have two. And the other thing is that one of the sort of counter concerns that folks have been raising is that concern for young professionals who might not be able to attend, because if there's only one sort of large annual conference, because everyone gets stuck on the annual conference as sort of being the end-all be-all, right? And it says, tough for entire divisions to leave at one time for a conference, likely that younger professionals will get left behind. And I, being the sort of, sarcastic one on the show, or at least that's my role, I would say this because, Tom, you're a vice president of student affairs at Louisville. You were a VP in Texas before this. Never, ever, I would imagine, did you split up your division and say, all right, half of you all are going to ACPA and half of you all are going to go to NASPA. It just doesn't happen, because you go to specialized conferences, you go to NACADA, you go to ACY or ACUHO, NACIS, you break it up. There's a lot of different places that people go to. And you go to the regionals, you present at the state, local stuff, and it's not the pie has been split in two, and now when we come together, it's going to eliminate some folks from being able to attend. It's just not a realistic, logical thing that happens. No one sends their entire division to a conference, and leaves the store behind. You don't even have to address this one. I'm just going to point that out there. Okay, I know you do. So go for it.
Well, see, I think part of the reason we want people to vote is right now all the members of both ACPA and NASPA have an opportunity to decide whether they want to have one association or two. That's the members' vote right now. If we have two organizations, it's really partly my choice as the vice president. I get to choose. I get to choose which organization we're going to pay institutional fees for. And for ACPA, that's about $1,500, and for NASPA, that's about $1,500. Again, doing the math, $3,000 to affiliate to ACPA and NASPA is a lot of institutional dollars. Now, we know what's going on economically, and I'm speaking as a VP now, but we know what's going on economically. We're cutting back on a number of things, and so what could I do with $3,000? Well, that is also the equivalent of what it costs to send roughly two people to a week-long conference. ACPA, solo, with airfare and other things like that, is about $1,000 to $1,500 per person. And so there's costs to sending people to associations, and you have to really believe as a VP in your commitment to professional development outside of your state. And let's not even go there, where some states can't allow you to travel beyond the borders now. And so I actually foresee a place at a time where this is going to be reduced within our respective campuses. And so for those listeners who are saying, how do we do this? I think some of the writing's already on the wall. But just by default, fewer and fewer people are going to have the resources given to them from their institutions to go to annual conventions, which makes it all the more meaningful that we emphasize the state and district level for professional development. But again, to your point, Eric, even on this campus and many of my other campuses, we've had individuals who are involved in ACUVO-I, NACA, ACUI, NASPA, ACPA, SACSA, you name them, and they're all involved. And not everyone goes to ACPA or NASPA, and partly so we can't afford it. Even the University of Louisville can't afford our members, our staff participating at that level across the board. When I was a small school dean, we couldn't do it either. So it's not just the fact that I'm at Louisville. It also applied almost 10 years ago, 14 years ago when I was a dean of students at a smaller university. So I think people have to vote, because if you don't vote, you leave it kind of to your VP. And I'm the fourth VP at the University of Louisville. I'm going to say something about that. 2 were NASPA presidents before me, Ed Hammond and Denny Golden, that were NASPA presidents. Denise Gifford was the third vice president, Tom Jackson's the fourth, and I was an ACPA president. And so we have this long history of national involvement. Somewhere along the way, we weren't members of ACPA some years, and some years we were not members of NASPA. But that was the choice made of that vice president at that particular point in time. I've chosen to be members of both, and have encouraged our staff on this campus to be members of both. That could change, though, very easily, and that's not true on many other campuses. So that's why it's important that people vote. And I've just made an argument for why we should have one, because then you leave it to folks like me to decide which one we really want to invest our money into.
So this just in, don't leave it up to Tom Jackson. I would say, I want to recognize some of the stuff that's happening on Twitter, and I apologize if I missed some of your tweets, because there's a lot coming in. One of the points that Chris Conson has made, and some other folks are echoing this, is, and I'm just going to quote it. It's using counter, in our language, using counter. The folks who are, it's hard to say, it's like pro, counter, whatever. Using counter views, it frames those opportunity, or those opposed. Excuse me. It frames those opposed to the consolidation as quote wrong, when there are, in Chris's tweet, that there are legitimate reasons, and as student affairs professionals, we need to validate those reasons that folks are putting out there. Again, I can't. It's against, right? It's either for or against. There's no middle. That Heidi Levine at ACPA said that DC law states that there is no legitimate legal way to abstain from voting. You either vote yes or you vote no, or you don't vote at all, which is effectively, unofficially, saying that you're saying no. Right. So, I mean, what are your thoughts about that? I struggle with it's sort of we live in the gray. And we don't live in a world where, there's always going to be an easy answer. And the folks who are specifically, very vocal about their views about consolidation were the NASPA yes folks, specifically. I haven't heard any sort of organized group from ACPA. And on NASPA's end, it was, a lot of former presidents, a lot of former pillars of the profession, people who were on the foundation board or former foundation leaders who are opposed to consolidation, and they came up with a website. Obviously, a lot of folks have seen it because there was an email that came out on NASPA's listserv. But how do we validate all views? Because in student affairs, another part of our organizational culture, our profession, is we listen, we practice empathy, and we validate all views even if we don't necessarily agree with them.
I sometimes think we can easily overcomplicate this question, and I can easily oversimplify the question as well. I sometimes wonder if it's as simple as, do we believe that we can be better as one than as two for the future of our profession? And that may be oversimplifying it all, but there's some simplicity in what we're really asking. I also think that we sometimes, as a profession, can over-intellectualize a very simple question. We do that in our academy throughout every single day. We start looking at angles and issues, and before you know it, we've buried ourselves in minutia, and we are unable to make a decision or to move because we've done so much, and we're just incapable.
Yeah.
That happens a lot in change theory as well. So here I think is a combination of all of those things. I think it is us over intellectualizing sometimes the most simplistic of questions. There's an enormous amount of information on consolidation. It's more than many of us receive when we are voting for congressional candidates for the U.S. Senate or Congress, even probably for our President of the United States. We have pages and pages and pages of documents on both ACPA and NASPA's webpage that anyone who wants to bury themselves in detail can get caught up in very, very easily. That's an enormous amount of information that can also handcuff you in a decision. I think it comes back to the simplicity of, do you believe we can be stronger as one rather than two for the future of our profession? Where would you rather have us 5 or 10 or 15 years from now? I look at it this way in a way, and I don't mean this to sound overly positive, but I think about the challenges that I face on the cabinet of the university, arguing for student resources, and then public policy issues that I have to listen to coming out of our state or even out of Washington, D.C. And I think it's important that we have strong voices, individuals who can counter sometimes those voices on behalf of our student body. I mean, we're talking about mental issues, mental health of our students, just as one example. Do I really want our provost and our president talking about those things on the macro level? They're going to anyway, and if I brief them well, I want them to be able to do that. But these are also things that I've worked very closely with for 25 years. I think I might be a pretty good advocate on each one of those, and I think folks in student affairs should take that, write about it, and be those individuals who are articulating that message. I think it's easier when you have one extremely strong organization advocating on behalf of our profession rather than two working internally to improve themselves, honestly. So I know I made an argument for why it should be one, but I don't mean to make that argument to marginalize the importance that if you don't want that, just don't vote for it. And if you really want to get caught up in all of the information that is out there and read it. But at this point in time, you just have to vote. It's a simple one, yes or no. Do you want to consolidate or do you not? And you may never get a chance to make this decision ever again in your career. And at some point in time, some of you might be sitting in this seat as a vice president saying, as they would say in Texas, dadgummit, I wish I would have voted this way 10, 15, 20 years ago, because that means a big expense that you have to pay for your division later on. And so I'm looking at it a little bit differently through a different lens, having lived this most of my career.
Well, Tom, we're going to make sure we finish on time here, so I've got one question for you, and maybe I'll try to pick another one to finish up. But the big question, if consolidation doesn't happen, then what? Where do you see the future of both organizations?
Well, in 2012, the world's ending anyway, so I think it's really...
Jeez.
According to the Mayan calendar, is that right? So
I have no formal comment on that particular one.
I don't think the world's going to end if we do not consolidate, but I do think some things are going to occur. We got two very strong organizations, and we have memberships in both of those organizations. They're not going to go away. There's often individuals who will say, well, we'll just outlive one or the other. 87, 90 plus years, that's just not going to happen. ACPA will be here 10 years from now, and NASPA will be here 10 years from now if we don't do that. I'm absolutely positive, though, the worst and best of both organizations are going to come out over the next 2 to 3 years, because both are going to redefine and rebrand who they are and how they want to conduct business and how they want to best serve their members. Let me make one sidebar on that. The biggest concern that we might have, we being all of us in the profession, would be, what if 65% of the members say we want to consolidate, but that's not 2/3? That's a problem for both organizations, and it has to be addressed at some point in time, because the majority of the members say what's going on here, but the supermajority just didn't allow for it. Going back to what I was saying, we're going to have an enormous amount of new competition, and that some might say is healthy. But when you're paying for that competition, I can make a pretty good case that may not be as healthy as we think it would be. And one or two organizations will begin to pull away from each other on differing things. I think we're going to have an enormous amount of duplicity in events because each organization will have to serve its members, not necessarily the profession, but their own members. And so ACPA will provide their smorgasbord of professional development opportunities. NASPA will do the exact same thing. We will see one mid-level management institute over here. We'll see one over here. We'll see one new professionals. We'll see one over here. And that duplicity will permeate throughout the United States because we'll be looking for members throughout the United States and the globe, essentially stepping on one another. I think that would happen. I think we'll also see some reduced memberships because along the way, the economy will drive folks like myself and folks like many of you listening to have to choose between one or the other and just stay with that one or the other, depending upon where the institutional dues may be going for your university. That, I don't think, will hurt one organization or the other, but it may, in turn, depending upon how well one markets itself or the other, pull one away from a membership standpoint. I don't think it will limit the mission and the purpose of the two respective organizations, but one's going to grow and one may not. I think NASPA's strength, well, NASPA's a very, very strong organization, and I do believe they'll grow in numbers, rightfully so. They have grown in numbers quite a lot in the last decade, to their credit, and that's very impressive to see. They're doing some fantastic things internationally, and I think that's going to continue to happen, and 10,000 will become 12,000, may become 14,000, and this won't necessarily be ACPA people migrating over. It will just be NASPA attracting more people from all over the place. I think that's a good thing. I think ACPA's strength in social justice and student development will come out because I do believe ACPA is the keeper of the student development profession, in part because of the journal and the faculty. And that will hone itself even tighter in a unique way, which will create somewhat of a chasm, I guess you could say, between ACPA and NASPA. And it will force us to have to collaborate in ways where we may be less comfortable with now that the members have spoken and competition is the order of the day. I have just a couple of other things. I think we may have a marginalization of our profession. And this is the one that worries me most. One of the two that worry me most. I have two final thoughts on that one. The marginalization of our profession. Just think of what has occurred with Texas Tech. You didn't talk about that today, but when Texas Tech slashed some of their upper administrators in student affairs and then farmed out departments to other units within that organization, that just doesn't look very good to folks like us in student affairs. We know why we have student affairs divisions, and we know who we serve, and we advocate for students, we understand the law, all those things. We need a voice at the table saying, this is just not what you should do if you really want to adhere to best practices and serve students. And that will be marginalized as we take two different approaches. Not to mention there are other organizations that are trying to create their market share as well, not just ACPA and NASPA. The last piece is, and this is somewhat personal, I think that we will, and this isn't so much about what we have done well and what we have not done well. This is more toward what we have failed to do, and that was to practice our own values. We have been extremely good at collaborating and listening and processing and all of those things, and it says a lot when the two number one collaborators on when the number one collaborator on a university campus can't collaborate with its own sister organization. That says a lot. That would say a lot to my provost. It would say a lot to my president as well, as it would to the industry abroad out there, as well as exhibitors and other folks like that, vendors, corporate partners, etc. I think there's something to be said that we have a duty to not only our students but also our profession. And here's that opportunity to really demonstrate that by voting. And so whether a person is for consolidation or not for consolidation, it's important that that person vote, exercise their right to vote. And as I said in the very beginning, what matters most is that the membership decides. It's been talked about a very, very long time. Just push the button, log on, and cast your vote. You may never have that chance again.
Yeah. Well, what is it, 10% of the members have to vote?
Yes.
We have to reach that number, right? 10% of each association membership has to vote, and then 66% have to be for in order for consolidation to go through. Is that the right?
Yeah, it's because we are doing this electronically, and a few years ago we wouldn't have even been able to do this because we didn't have electronic voting a few years ago. So the bylaws have changed for both organizations. But to meet a quorum, you have to have 10% of your membership cast a ballot. Now, it can be for or against. It doesn't really matter, but you need 10% of your members to meet quorum. Thereafter, in total, you have to meet that two-thirds threshold. And if two-thirds say yes, then we will begin the dialogue on what we will do next in consolidation. And this was deliberate. We essentially said we can really go a long ways down this path and waste energy of the membership, or we can decide at this point, and if it's a yes, invest in that time with some deliberance. And that was very deliberate on our part as a consolidation steering team. So you're absolutely right, 10% and two-thirds.
Well, Tom, I know the folks are still tweeting. They're putting out questions. There's a lot to cover, and we're hitting about the top of the hour here, so I want to make sure that I let folks go off to their next meeting or their coffee break or whatever they need. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I think that it's a really contentious issue in a lot of ways. I'm excited for the future either way because it's forced us to sit back and engage in a way that we haven't really done as a profession. I mean, you've got everybody talking about both associations and the future of our profession in a way that probably hasn't taken place ever before. And I just want to thank you for coming on. Any final thoughts around consolidation? Just your experience as someone who's been involved kind of over the long haul. Just any final takeaways? I'd love to hear it.
I would say two things. One is we are student affairs, and our fundamental role is to serve our student body, to help create an educated citizenry that can really address the complex issues of this globe. It's not so much to make NASPA better or to make ACPA better. We do that secondarily through our memberships within both organizations. So I don't want us to lose sight that we have a higher calling in the work that we do. And it's a good work. It really is incredible work, that the things we get to do in influencing our student bodies on our respective campuses. This is a very small piece to the noble things that we do every single day. Now, having said that, we get to ask ourselves and answer this question. What is best for the future of our profession? Is it one organization? Is it two? Is it supporting two organizations or taking two and letting them thrive as they have the last 90 years in similar but different directions? That's a membership decision. And so I urge everyone who has not cast a vote to cast their vote, and we will let the chips fall where they fall, and we will pick up whatever's left and we will move on. That's what we do in student affairs, and that's why we're good at what we do.
Well, thanks, Tom. I really appreciate it. It's been a great journey having you on the show. I think a lot of folks got a lot out of it, and as Twitter has shown us, we're getting a lot of engagement and feedback.
Thank you, Eric. It was an honor to be here and talk more about this.
Thanks, Tom. All right, folks. Well, thanks for tuning in. This has been, quite the show. We had a lot of comments, a lot of thoughts, and I know my head is literally spinning from all the tweets that folks have been putting out and everything. So, a huge shout out to Tom Jackson for being on the show. I know he's Tom Jack Jr. on Twitter. If you want to give him a follow, he is definitely up there with the tweeting SSAO crowd. So give him a follow. We will be putting the archive of today's show on higheredlive.com, so if you want, you can go ahead and take a look at that probably in a couple days, as it takes me a little bit of time to put it online. I want to give a shout out again to our sponsor. Student Affairs Live is sponsored by Integral. Integral is the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Please make sure that you check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. Some really neat things that they're doing with Facebook. Their webinar happens this Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, and Ardith again will be putting out a tweet about that webinar. So without our sponsors, we have no show. And Student Affairs Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network, and honestly, it's a great network, but again, we have to have sponsors to put on the show. So also want to give a quick shout out to the next show. Next week, I'm having Leslie Dare. Leslie Dare is actually at NC State, and she is a student affairs techie du jour. She does a lot of stuff with IT and student affairs, and we're going to talk about sort of student affairs technology and grad programs, because it's something that we don't talk enough about, I think, is sort of where folks are getting their knowledge and learning around technology and in student affairs. So Leslie Dare, who's actually one of the former chairs of the Technology Knowledge Community for NASPA, is going to be on the show next week. So please stay tuned for that. And again, as always, folks, thanks for watching.